Has God called you to do the work of the ministry, but yet you're frustrated with the results that you're seeing? Frustration is a dangerous time for those in the ministry, because with the frustration comes the temptation to quit. If that's you, I invite you to join in on today's session of Leadership on the Run. Good morning, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Leadership on the Run. You will recall that we're dealing on the subject of the frustration of the sower. And you recall that we are using the parable found in Matthew chapter 13 regarding the sower of the seed. You will recall that we talked very briefly in one of the episodes regarding the seed that was sown. We looked at it from the perspective of the seed. And then we began to look at the principles of farming and how that applies to the work of the ministry. And then we also looked at the different qualifications, the level of experience, the talents and skill sets of the individuals that are doing the work, and some of the personality qualities. All of those affect the level of harvest that you can expect. We talked about diverse resources and how resources affect the outcome of the harvest as well. And then lastly, last week I discussed the difference in the quality of the seed. If you're not sowing quality seed, then you might actually be sowing weeds amongst your harvest. And so the level of the quality of your seed affects the level of harvest. This morning I would like to bring up one other factor that affects the harvest, and that is different levels of resistance. Jesus said that in one case that the seed was attacked by the birds, but birds are not the only thing that hinders the farmer. There's also insects, disease, wilt, lack of pollination, theft, terrorism. All of these are an attack on the harvest. And I want you to know that in the ministry that I understand, regardless of what you do in the kingdom, you're going to be attacked for it. Now, it's okay, and it's easier to accept when the attack comes from a third party. If it comes from the outside, it's a little more difficult if the attack's coming from within. Maybe it's coming within your kingdom. Not your kingdom, I apologize. Maybe it's coming within your congregation, those under your leadership influence, or it could be your family itself. There are different levels of attack out there. And if you put your hand to the plow, I will tell you that at some point you're going to be attacked for it. Now, as a pastor, I will tell you that I have had that. I have been attacked, and in one case, I resigned a church and had to wipe the dust off of my feet when I left the town. I want you to know that not in that church, but in other churches, I've actually had death threats for preaching the gospel. You're always going to have a level of attack, and usually that level of attack coincides with the level of harvest that is coming. I recall several years ago, I was watching a show on one of the cable channels, and they were doing a study or expository, whatever you want to call it. They were doing a special presentation on two evangelists. One was Benny Hinn and one was Reinhard Bonnke. and it was a secular attack on a spiritual leader. It's impossible to explain spiritual concepts to unspiritual people. And so as a result, they just ripped these two evangelists to shreds. Now, you may not agree with either one of those evangelists, and you certainly have your right. But I will tell you that I was watching this in my bed that night. I remember it very profoundly. And I was watching this, and I remember it just broke my heart that these men were under the level of attack that they were under. Basically, they attributed the works of God to hypnosis or some such as that. I don't recall all of the details. What I do recall is this: I sat up in that bed that night, and I wept for those two men, and I said, God, I am not ready for that level of attack on my ministry. And Lord, I pray that you would somehow, some way support these men in what they're doing in the kingdom. But it broke my heart because I knew that level of attack would have been more than enough to crush me. Both of those men survived that and continued to thrive in their ministry. But regardless of the ministry that God has called you to do, I want you to know that there is a level of attack that you can expect. I think it's Joyce Meyer that says, for every new level, there's a new devil. I don't know if you agree with that, but I will tell you this, that the level of attack will always coincide with the level of danger that you are to the kingdom of hell. And you need to understand that's a given. You cannot do the work of the ministry and everything go right and everything be wonderful and everything go your way. It just doesn't happen. At some point, you're going to be under attack. And so just like the farmer has to deal with the birds and the insects, the disease, the wilt, the lack of pollination, theft, and even terrorism, you're going to have a level of attack of some form at some time. You need to just resolve in your mind and your heart that you're not going to let anything hinder your ability to execute the duty of the calling on your life. Because I can tell you, when all is said and done and it's time for you to leave this world, you're not going to remember the attack. The only thing you're going to have is regret regarding what you did not do in your calling. And so I encourage you today to withstand the attack. Find somebody to stand with you and keep pressing forward. Also, the farmer has to deal with other outside influences such as climate. In this particular case, Jesus said the sun came, but there's also other factors in climate as well. There's drought, there's frost, there's storms, there's all kinds of things that affect your harvest. This year in the garden that I raised in my home, I will tell you, we had a storm this year that came in. The winds were very high, and I had planted tomato plants, and the storm actually broke the branches off of the tomatoes. But fortunately, it was still connected to the vine, and I was able to bind it up, and I was still able to get a harvest. And I will tell you that that's exactly what you may have to do in the ministry. The storms may come, the climate may be working against you. Sometimes you just have to bind up what you got and keep moving forward. I'm not talking about binding principalities or powers. That would fall under the attack portion. But sometimes you have to bind up the hearts of the people, bandage them up, if you will, spiritually speaking, and keep moving forward. Because sometimes just the climate itself, the climate in which you're operating in has an impact on the outcome of your ministry. And then there's also the level of soil that you're planting in. There are soils, different types of soil out there. I always recall I got on a plane and I went and ministered in the state of Iowa. And as I was landing the plane, this southern boy looked out the window and it looked like the fields had all been set on fire because everything was black. And when I landed, I realized that it was because the soil was that rich. It was just black. It was so rich. And I, being the southern boy that I am, I came from the state of Georgia. All of our soil, it wasn't black, it was red because it was mixed with clay. And now I live in Florida, and the soil here is terrible. It's called sand, and you water it today, and tomorrow it's dry. So I want you to know the soil has a great deal to do with your level of harvest, and that's true in the ministry as well. I don't know what kind of soil God has called you to sow in. You may have a rich soil, and then you're getting a great harvest. You may have stony soil, and maybe you're not getting so much of a harvest. Maybe you're planting in Arizona where it's dry and parched and desert. I understand. Maybe God has called you to minister in an area that is like here. It's not dry. You can wet it, but tomorrow it's going to need it again. It's a constant thing, drawing off of your energies, your strengths, and your resources. But I want you to know your climate that you're ministering in has an impact on the harvest that you can expect. And also the soul, as I mentioned. Also, there's one other thing that I want to discuss before we end this series, and that is the differences of challenges that you may have outside of climate. I want to talk for a moment about the storms that you have to deal with. In the ministry, there are times that things rise up, and it's a time of controversy. I want you to know that Paul told the Ephesian elders while he was in Miletus, he sent for the Ephesian elders, and he was on his way to Jerusalem. He knew that things weren't going to go well for him when he got there. But he also warned the leaders of Ephesus. He said, I know that when I leave here, grievous wolves are going to come in among you, not sparing the flock. In other words, Satan wasn't going to attack from outside. He was going to divide from within. And those are some of the most difficult storms, because we as ministers, we don't want to have the responsibility, this is wheat and this is tares, this is good and this is bad, because God has not called us to be supernatural umpires. But there are times that you have some wolves in sheep's clothing that come in amongst you for the sole purpose of causing division and confusion. You say, Pastor, what do you do in those cases? I will tell you what I do. I can't recommend it to everyone. I am a head-on kind of guy. And I have a tendency to hit things head-on. I know I've had other ministers say, brother, never hit anything head-on, you can sideswipe. And I understand that. But if it's attacking my sheep, you see a whole different side of me. And my forehead becomes much more hard than their forehead. And I can meet that resistance, and I meet it head on and call a spade a spade. And if I have to walk to that pulpit to do it, I'm willing to do it. So, if you want to attack my sheep, okay, bring it. Because when I stand in that pulpit Sunday morning, I'm going to let everybody know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. Now, again, I can't advise everyone to do that, because sometimes that storm is more than one person. Sometimes it's a group of people. Maybe you're ministering in a hostile environment, and I've been there and I've done that. Like I said, there's one church that I left that I wiped the dust off my feet, and I've never been to that community since. I mean, God delivered me. He didn't resign me. I resigned, but believe you me, I was done. And so, there are times where you have some storms that arise. In that particular church, I will tell you that I pastored it for 3 years. And for 3 years, it was a constant state of confusion. Some of the board meetings prior to my arrival there were very colorful. And that was the first thing I had to put an end to when I got there. Don't misunderstand me. That church has some wonderful people in it, but it just had a segment of people that wanted to be in control, and they wanted things to go their way, and they wanted to be the ones in a place of honor. You got to execute the duties of your calling, even in times of storm. And so what I would say to you, if you're dealing with a storm, I would say do not just let the storm brew. You still have you still have the responsibility of protecting your sheep, even in the times of the storm. And so you make sure that not only are you protecting yourself and your family, but that you also have the welfare of the sheep in mind. There's also, when you're dealing with the work of the ministry or the work of farming, there's the big thing of timing. Everybody in today's society wants everything now. We have a drive-through mentality. We want to drive through a drive-through window somewhere, roll down the window and say, God, I need 37 new members in my church on Sunday morning. Drive off, and that Sunday have 37 people there. That's just not how the ministry operates. A farmer doesn't plant seed and then demand that it grow and produce a harvest today. Most of the seed that I planted in my garden this year took 2 months before you could even start seeing blooms blossoming on the plants. You sow, and then you have to work the ground. You have to keep the weeds off of it, and you have to understand that there's a timing for everything under the sun. Paul talks about a time where there was some confusion regarding leadership. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul writes that I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but it's God that's making it grow. And we need to understand that once we've sown the seed and we've done everything that we can do, we've watered it with the word. We planted the word, the seed of the word. It's been watered by the Holy Spirit. We have kept it weed free. We have prepped the ground as much as we've known how to do. Then all you can do sometimes is just believe God for the remainder of it, which is the timing. And I will tell you, there is often a time between sowing and harvest. There is a time. I'm often reminded of when I went to Israel. One of the places that I went to on my first trip to Israel was I went to Lazarus' tomb, and I entered it. I followed down this tunnelway until I got to the bottom, where you had to get down on all fours and walk through this little passageway to get into an interior room where they would have held the body of Lazarus. And it occurred to me at that point that when Jesus was standing in front of the tomb and he cried out, Lazarus, come forth, that there was a time and a season of hesitation there. There was a time between Lazarus come forth and Lazarus presenting himself, because it took time for Lazarus to unwrap himself. And it took time for Lazarus to crawl out on all fours to get into that passageway. And then it took time for Lazarus to get to the top of the hill before anybody ever saw him. And you know what Jesus said? Jesus didn't say, you are delivered of all of the baggage in your life. No, he looked at the people around him and said, loose that man and let him go. It's our responsibility to help loose them and let them go, knowing that there is a season between Lazarus to come forth and seeing Lazarus with our own eyes. There is a season between planting and harvest. And we can't get in a rush. We can't get in a hurry. I understand that you have a calling on your life and you're in a hurry to see souls saved. I understand that. Jesus is as well. But there is a timing associated with the kingdom. And you must understand that that timing is vital to the harvest. And lastly, I just want to mention that it's very important that before you sow your seed, that the ground is prepped. Sometimes that comes at a cost. That's labor. It's not easy. It's not easy being in the ministry. But what I would say to you is this. Maybe what you're doing right now is not sowing the seeds for harvest. Maybe what you're doing now is you're trying to prep ground for a future planting, for a future harvest. Don't get discouraged. Don't give up, because God has a perfect plan for your life, and He didn't call you to do the ministry that you're doing just to see you fail. God will see you through. If you're in His perfect will for your life, you're in His perfect will for your life, I assure you that God will bring forth a harvest in due time. God bless you for joining us in this series. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.